Welcome to the foreign policy of President George Washington, arguably our most beloved president ever. Definitely the first president of the brand new United States of America. As the first president, he set many precedents, and foreign policy is one of them. So by the end of this video, you should be able to respond to this statement. Well, it's a question, it's not a statement. What was Washington's foreign policy? Give an example and identify its impact. And it's really kind of a cheating question because it's really 3 questions. But you'll know all of that by the end of this video. It starts with the French Revolution. The same year that George becomes president, the French Revolution begins. And this revolution is very much like the American Revolution. The French people want democracy. And it's inspired by the American Revolution. When they saw that the colonists could win against big bad Britain, the French people rose up and tried to do the same thing. And they looked to the United States for support. The French had given aid to the colonists during the American Revolution and helped us win the war. So now, a little bit more than 10 years later, they said, hey, it's time for a little payback. So what is Washington to do? Well, the first thing he does is turn to his cabinet. And that's why he chose these advisors. And he got conflicting opinions. Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, said, no, don't help the French. This revolution is turning into a hot mess. They're running around cutting everybody's head off, and we don't want any part of it. On the other hand, Thomas Jefferson, who had been ambassador to France in the past, said, yes, of course we have to help them. It's our obligation. It's our duty. They're fighting for freedom just as we did. They helped us. We got to help them. You know, one hand washes the other. In the end, Washington, who had been very leery from the get-go to get involved in this, went with Hamilton and said, no, we're not getting involved. We're not going to help the French. We're not going to take sides. We're going to be neutral. So an extension of the French Revolution was a war between France and Britain. France declared war on Britain, and once again, Washington had to decide what to do. And his decision was to make a proclamation of neutrality, saying that we, the United States of America, would not take sides and we would remain neutral for this war in Europe. While this war between France and Britain is going on, the British are running out of soldiers. They need more soldiers to fight in the war. And one way that they get them is to board American merchant ships and kidnap the sailors, forcing them to be British soldiers. This kidnapping of sailors is called impressment. They're being pressed to become British soldiers. And as I'm sure you're not surprised, the Americans are not happy about this. All right, one of America's core values is capitalism and doing business and trade. And here are these ships just trying to do business, and the English are coming along, jumping on board and kidnapping sailors. Not cool. In an attempt to use diplomacy, George Washington sent envoy John Jay to Britain to try to sit down and work out the problems that we were having. And John Jay came back with a treaty. It was not popular. It's known as Jay's Treaty. The official name of it is the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, but you will almost always hear and read that it as Jay's Treaty. So the treaty was very weak. It really didn't give the United States what it was that they needed, and it didn't even address impressment at all. So the American people were not happy with this treaty, but Congress approved the treaty and Washington signed it. This is the first time that Washington is spoken of in a negative manner. It is the very first time anybody is anything other than respectful and enthralled with everything that Washington does, from being a general in the army to the first president. He is so highly respected, and yet there were grumblings after Jay's Treaty. This next treaty with a foreign country is much better than Jay's Treaty. So Spain controlled the area that we know today as Florida. And the United States and Spain were having a dispute as to the boundary between the two places. And Pinckney sat down and worked out an agreement with Spain that the boundary would be at the 31st parallel, which is exactly what the United States wanted. So that was a win for us, as well as we were guaranteed navigation rights of the Mississippi River. And this was huge for farmers. The Mississippi River feeds into the Ohio River, and farmers from the Ohio River Valley area could send their goods and produce to be sold. So this was a much better treaty, and it was very well received. After 2 terms in office, President Washington decided not to run again for president, even though at the time the Constitution did not limit the number of terms that a president could sit. But he felt 2 terms was enough, and that was another precedent that he set, and every president after him would only run for 2 terms until the 1930s when we get to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So as he's leaving office, Washington gives a farewell address to the people. In it, he advises that America steer clear of permanent alliances, which means stay neutral, stay isolated, and don't get involved in other people's problems. Every president for almost 100 years after Washington's farewell address follows his advice and tries to have the United States follow the policy of neutrality and isolation. Until 1898, with President McKinley, we get into the Spanish-American War. This is not an example of neutrality or isolation. And after that, the United States, even though we talk about during World War II and even World War I, we talk the neutrality story. We're really not. We get into both wars, and this is kind of the end point when the United States really stops being neutral and takes a stand and makes alliances. So that is George Washington's foreign policy. So, did you consider the original question? What was Washington's foreign policy? Give an example and identify its impact, right? What was it? Give me an example of what it was, and what was its effect, impact, long term. For your riddle, every one of my videos end with a corny riddle. I like corny. Corny can be funny, okay? You ready? What do you call a pig that does karate? Hmm, a pork chop. Are you laughing? I know you're laughing. Even if you're only laughing on the inside, you're laughing. Thank you so much for listening and watching this video. Like it if you liked it, and check out my other videos as well.